All right, everybody, good morning. Thanks a bunch for joining us today. My name is Jed Falgren. I'm MnDOT's TSMO director. And I want to start out here. One of the things that you probably saw when you came in is that this is a session being recorded. We're recording it in order to be able to share this information potentially later with those who have not come in with it. So in order to do that, I got to read the fine print first. So as a part of its business activities related to blowing snow control within MnDOT's operations division, the University of Minnesota staff will record this presentation for viewing by any party interested in this event, with access to the University of Minnesota internal and external websites and YouTube. If you've enabled your camera during this session, the recording may include your image, which is private data under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. You are not required to allow MnDOT to use your image, and there are no consequences for failing to do so or declining to do so. To opt out of that recording, just simply turn off your camera, and the recording will be accessible to anyone with access to the University of Minnesota internal and external websites and YouTube, or anyone authorized by law. Questions, if you have any, please enter those in the chat. We'll try to get to them, but in all the event we are unable to do so, we will get, if we are unable to do so during the event, we will get those answers to you afterwards and send them on your way. So that being said, once again, good morning. My name is Jed Falgren. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And it's an exciting time. It's a neat time for us to continue to move forward in our blowing snow control efforts. Dean, you can go and advance to the next slide. We will be joined, as you can see, by some individuals from the University of Minnesota, Dean Current, Gary Wyatt, and Aidan Read, as well as Dan Gullickson and myself today. And we're absolutely thrilled to have you. We are key believers that this is a critical way for us to grow a very effective tool in our blowing snow control effort, and that is getting field personnel up to speed, understanding, and being aware of the tools that we have at our disposal to go ahead and increase that. We're going to talk, Dan's going to talk some of the technical side about the different types of blowing snow control that we have as a part of it. But one of the things also that Aidan's going to start out with is some information on research that the U of M has been doing with actual snow fence users in the state of Minnesota. And we think that's important, both just to make you aware of it, but also as you connect with landowners, with farmers, and work with them on trying to convince them that this is a worthwhile activity. They're going to have some concerns, and many of those concerns are real. And what we want to be able to do is share with them some information that has been experienced by actual users. So that's our big focus today. We really think that that our employees are going to be, frankly, our field employees can be some of the best conduit in order to convince someone to get into a blowing snow solution. So I want to touch base on that from an operations division perspective, and that's all of us that work out in the field are a part of the operations division, part of MnDOT. We certainly want to be able to share a little bit of what our goals are. And we have been doing blowing snow control for years. In fact, I'll argue that my start happened about when I was about 7 or 8 years old, when I lived next door to the maintenance superintendent in southwestern Minnesota. And he had us doing blowing snow control in our yard. We installed snow fence, so we were able to prevent his driveway from filling up with snow. And I now understand that's why because he wanted to get to work. So it's something we've done for a long time, but we want to be able to continue to do that. And to that, we've got set up some goals within operations division. At the end of last winter, and then end of the 2021 winter, we had just under 11% of the snow traps, which we had identified over the years, our most significant inventory being done in 2008. 11% of those snow traps had been managed or were being managed by a blowing snow control solution. And our goal in this biennium, and I anticipate this moving forward in the years to come, we want to get a little bit better every year, 1% better. So we want to be up over 12% this upcoming winter, and we'd love to be at 13% beyond that. And that's going to take some effort. And we do know that there was money set aside for a significant amount of snow fence construction as a part of last biennium. But we also know that we've got to identify some new sites. And actually, Dan's going to talk a little bit about the idea of standing corn rows or hay bales can certainly be a gateway method for a farmer to be convinced that it's going to be happening. So I'm really excited for us to share some information with you today. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Aidan. He's going to talk about some of the work on research. So Aidan, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Jed. Good morning, everybody. Dean, let's go to the next slide. And one more. So what I'm going to talk about today is some of our research that we've conducted over the last couple months, over the last year, I suppose. So basically what we did is we identified folks who were what we call early adopters of snow fences. So they were kind of the first couple people to be in this program. And we looked at folks who were doing standing corn rows, living snow fences, and also just structural snow fences, so permanent structures. And here's just a quick map from an application we developed called Farm Maps. This shows kind of the spread of the case studies that we had. So pretty broad swath of the state was covered. In fact, we had participants from every district except for District 1. Next slide, please, Dean. And so what these case studies were for, the case study methodology gives us kind of a deeper insight into a smaller number of individuals. So rather than being like a survey where at the end of the survey, we could say, this is what, the population says this. Snow fence practitioners believe this. Instead, this gives us kind of a deeper insight into, why folks were doing what they did, how specific experiences have gone. And it's kind of a guide for future research. And it kind of gives us an idea of where to focus. So there were only 30 studies included, which is a large number of interviews. It took a long time, but it's not as comprehensive as like a poll. So it's a little bit different. And so looking at these case studies, we had 17 living snow fences captured, 4 structures, and then 10 standing corn rows. And for those of you who it's not too early for, you'll see that does not add up to 30. Some folks were doing multiple different ones. So it's not uncommon for folks to start out with standing corn rows and then have some success and transition into, or add a living snow fence, or in some cases, even a structure. Next slide, Dean. And so one of the things we were really interested in was, how did people get here? How did people join this program? Why did people begin using snow fences? Overwhelmingly, the answer that we found was contact by MnDOT staff. So, more actually 3/4 of folks were specifically able to say that either they had been working with their county or something, and the MnDOT staff member had reached out to them to basically say, are you interested in this program? We'd love to get you enrolled in some standing corn rows. We think your property is a good fit for a living snow fence. Some contact with MnDOT really was what pushed them to engage in this program. And besides that, 3/4 of folks who were who were contacted by MnDOT, the rest were just other agency staff, whether that was the NRCS or the county or even U of M Extension. And we'll admit, sometimes there's a little bit of an alphabet soup situation where somebody might have thought it was the NRCS. In fact, it was MnDOT. Somebody might have thought it was, Extension, really it was the county. Regardless, overwhelmingly, it was agency staff and specifically the Department of Transportation that really drove this program. Next slide, Dean. Another thing that we really wanted to get more information on was, beyond that, initial spark, beyond that first contact, what motivated people to engage in this program? So we looked at 3 kind of primary motivations that came out of our interviews. We looked at conservation, that idea of improving wildland, habitat, pollinators, hunting grounds, that's conservation. We looked at public safety or transportation. That's the idea that you're kind of doing a civic duty thing. You're making your community, you're offering a service to the community, you're reducing traffic accidents. And the other thing we looked at was financial. So how much is that farmer or landowner, how much is their financial position being improved? How much of a motivation is that actual cash payment, whether that was an easement that was permanent or whether that's an annual rental agreement. And based on this, we kind of looked at what's a really strong motivator, what's kind of another, a secondary motivator, and what's not a strong motivator. And you can see, hopefully you can see in this graph, public safety and transportation was the strongest motivator. So, a lot of these folks were really, really motivated by the idea that they're doing something right. They're doing something that's good for the community, something that's offering a benefit to their neighbors. And then the strongest secondary motivation was financial. So first you have that public safety benefit. Second, you have people who are benefiting from getting a cash payment, whether an easement or a rental. And something that turned out to not really be a strong motivator was the conservation side of things. We did have a couple folks, looks like 3 folks in our chart who said that conservation was their strongest motivator. And those are folks who are more, typically, of those 3, those were people who are doing living snow fences. So something that is providing a little more of a direct benefit to either hunting ground or wildlife habitat. Whereas for standing corn rows, that was not the case. It was going to be somebody who was more interested in public safety as well as that financial side of things. Next slide, Dean. So the other thing we were interested in was seeing, we have kind of an idea of where costs are going to come from. That's why folks are getting paid. That's, we're trying to compensate them for that land and for the service that land is providing to the state in holding up the snow. And so we were interested in where were these costs coming from for folks. And it's important to say these case studies are really interested in observations. These aren't facts. We're not going out and measuring, the impact on combines for people. We're asking them, do you think you're using your equipment more often? Do you think that your labor has gone up? Do you think your yield has been impacted? Because that's really what we're interested in. If we're going to expand this program, we want to know what people feel. We want to know what they think. And so, interestingly, the impact on yield, and this is yield not in that specific area, but in the adjacent areas, generally there was no impact. Some people did see a reduction in yield, but overall it was about 2/3 no impact, 1/3 had a reduction in yield. Looking at labor, we had about, again, 1/3 with no impact, 1/3 with a slight increase, and that was kind of that 2 to 3 hours a year range, which is pretty insignificant. And then 1/3 that saw a more significant increase. That was basically anything about 5 hours. Nobody was spending an exceptional amount of time. And again, this impact on labor, that's going to be from doing a salvage harvest in the spring. So going out and combining the corn in the spring. It's going to come from doing mowing or something with the living snow fence, or it's going to come from just a general, the moving of equipment around the corn. The impact on equipment, again, overwhelming amount had no impact. So 81% no impact, 20% saw an increased use. And that was going to be primarily in the standing corn rows, people using a combine in the spring that they wouldn't, that's an additional pass they wouldn't have usually been using. Next slide, Dean. So again, looking at a couple of the impacts on farming. So two of the things that we were really interested in, soil moisture, and then the associated impact on when folks are getting into the field. So looking at soil moisture, it was about half and half saw no impact versus a higher soil moisture content. And that's going to be in that drop area where the snow is being stored and landing over the winter. And then we did have, I think that's 1 or 2 folks who said that they actually had lower soil moisture, and they kind of attributed that to the increased infiltration. So again, we're looking at folks' observations. What are they seeing when they're out in the fields? And so the fact that we kind of had 50-50 tells us that we're not really seeing a significant, that's not becoming a problem. That's what we really want to know. And then looking at how that translates into the impact on the start of season, it's really significant. No impact for 85%. And that's what we like to see. Slight delay was a few people, and then really only one person who had what you would consider a significant delay. That's somebody whose overall operation was impacted, was delayed by having standing corn rows. Whereas the slight delay, what that usually means is maybe they didn't get into that field when they had planned on it, but they were able to just go to the next one and come back later. And it really didn't provide much of impact. And so that's really great news for us. We want to make sure that folks are being compensated in a way that covers these costs. And the fact that so many people are really having minimal costs incurred tells us we're on the right track with that. Next slide, Dean. So again, going back to that compensation, one of our questions was just, do you feel you're being adequately compensated? Overwhelming majority said yes, they are. Yes, they were being compensated, and yes, it was adequate. We had one person who said no, they were not being compensated. That was actually kind of a unique case. That was a structure. So that had a permanent easement on it, and he had purchased that land with that easement. So in theory, he got a lower purchase price because it had a permanent easement on it. But like I said, we're interested in perceptions and observations. He felt that he was not adequately compensated. And then we had a minority of folks who did not feel they were compensated adequately. They would have appreciated more payment. And those were typically folks doing living snow fences. And then here's kind of the breakdown on living snow fences and standing corn rows. Give me 1 second here. I apologize. Sorry about that, folks. Getting the family ready for school. All right, next slide, Dean. And then just more broadly, we want to know, what challenges do people face? If we can kind of address these challenges, we can help people adopt snow fences more widely. So just here's kind of a rough visualization of some of those things that became recurring problems. Spring, installation, labor. That spring, that's just that salvage harvest of corn. That presents a lot of difficulties. Now, again, the payment they're receiving is paying for that corn. So anything they're, our thoughts or anything they're salvaging in the spring is extra. But still, that's money in the field. So they're trying to get it, but it does present some difficulties. Installation, that's a problem with living snow fences and structures. Really not a challenge at all for folks doing standing corn rows. That's why we really like that standing corn row system as an entry-level kind of method. Planting, again, there's some challenges for standing corn rows of planting, getting that site assessed and if you're doing corn on corn, when rather usually you'd be doing corn on soybeans, there are some challenges there. But again, that planting is really more of a living snow fence challenge. So lots of different ideas that we can kind of take and help adjust our program. Next slide, Dean. So that was all that information. If you have any questions about some of our results from that or kind of how we interpret that, certainly put a question in the chat and I'll address it. Now I'm going to talk briefly about a tool that we've been developing as kind of a resource for folks like yourself who might be having conversations with farmers or landowners about snow fences, and kind of a resource we're trying to provide to just anybody who's doing this work in the state. Next slide, Dean. So the link to this website will be provided to you. It's farmmaps.umn.edu. And basically, I would love to be able to show you this just as a walkthrough on a browser, but it tends to clog up Zoom and it doesn't do very well. So we just have some screenshots here. And so again, jump in with any questions. Basically, you go to this application and this is your starting screen. So you can see I was sitting here in my office in Minneapolis when I did it. And so you basically get an indication of your location and then all of the different practices around you. So I've got the map on the left and then a listing of the different farms and different individuals on the right. Next slide, Dean. Then I should note you can sort that. We've got some soil health case studies on there as well for folks who are interested in more conservation farming. We're really focused on the snow fences here, obviously. And so this is just a great example. This is Roger Thompson. I believe he's up in District 2. He has a living snow fence, and we have a satellite view on farm maps. So I can actually zoom in, and wherever possible, we have these indicators tagged to that actual fence location. So obviously there's nothing to see for the standing corn rows, but for a living snow fence, I can actually zoom in all the way and see Roger Thompson has that snow fence right there across from the elevator, and kind of lets you see, kind of gives you a better visualization of what those the space they actually take up. And so again, the map on the left, and I've got that Roger Thompson's little farm information is highlighted on the right. Next slide, Dean. And so when I click on Roger Thompson's little indicator on the right, I can click on the detail side, and it pulls up some more information. I've got information about that actual snow fence, the challenges he faced, the size of the fence, what that land is being used for, and even the agreement type. And then we have, kind of going deeper into it, the impacts they observed both on, transportation, whether they saw more pheasants or something like that. We try to include all that information that's useful to people. And then the impact on the farm operation. Were they delayed getting in there in the spring? Were they able to do a successful salvage harvest of corn? All that kind of information is all something we've provided there. Next slide, Dean. And then there's also a spot to just click on, there's a little PDF file you can click on, and it pulls up kind of a typed up PDF that you can print out there. And the thought with that is that, if you're going to somebody who's actually Roger Thompson's next door neighbor, you can just print this out and bring it with you, and they've got all that information there, as well as some contact information that they can pursue this further. And so every case study will have one of these printable PDFs as well. Next slide, Dean. And then we also have driving directions. So, say you're not a next door neighbor, you're a couple, in this case, an hour and 5 minutes away by plane, 5 hours away driving. You can actually just click on it, and there's a little button that says get directions. You just click the get directions, and there you go. So we try to make it as accessible and as easy as possible. Next slide, Dean. And then this is a video. So Dean, why don't you give it a click and we'll see what happens. So Dan did a fantastic job of coordinating an effort to get not just still imagery, but also video of a lot of these farms via drone. So that's all online. It's going to be a little rough quality watching a video on a PowerPoint over Zoom, but all of this is on YouTube. So go to Farm Maps and you should be able to click through it just fine. And we tried to get some really good imagery, both of standing corn rows, the living snow fences for any folks that are interested in that. There's also those structures up there as well. Let's go to the next slide, Dean, please. And so then just kind of looking through a few other examples. This is an individual in District 3. You can see he's got some spruce. They're actually in a pretty young snow fence. This would be a living snow fence as well. Again, that indicator just pulls up right to the fence. You can zoom in on satellite view and take a look at that. Next slide. And again, we've got that right up. In this case, the land use is actually CRP. Right under his name, you've got Larson case study.pdf. That's that printable PDF for you to take a look at. Next slide. Yep, and there's just another example. I've just got a couple different examples from across the state just to kind of give you a taste here. With the living snow fence, we kind of include a description of the different species that are involved just because a lot of folks find that interesting. Next slide, Dean. Yep, and it'll be a 2-page PDF as well, front and back. Next page. And this is another great example. So you can see this is actually the 169 corridor just south of the metro. And there's been a really great success at getting some standing corn rows set up in that area. So these are examples of people who began this program because of a concentrated push by MnDOT and also saw their neighbors doing it. So as they kind of were getting this information, they're also seeing it working nearby. So Terry Schwartz is a great example. Next slide, Dean, of some great standing corn rows. So, you know, if you were to continue that effort on the I-69 corridor or 169, you know, you could pull up a series of case studies as an example of this area. Next slide. And then here's another video. We can give it a click and see. I just wanted to give you a shot of the standing corn rows too. This is Tim McDonough in District 6. So again, just some really high quality video. This one just really captures how that snow fence captures snow. So just a really great example of that fence doing its job. And this is the type of stuff that, you know, if you're in a conversation with somebody, you know, and you have a smartphone and you're able to pull this up, I mean, pictures are worth 1,000 words and videos are probably worth even more than that. So this is just some really good material to have with you as you have these conversations. Next slide, Dean. And I promise on YouTube, they're hopefully a little higher quality. Kurt Blomgren's a great example of somebody doing a structure, you know, not as visible as that living snow fence, but you can still certainly see that there is something out in that field. And again, we've got that drone imagery in the video to back it up. Next slide, Dean. Yep, it's just another good shot. I believe this is Kurt's farm again as well. And so you can really see, you know, how he's been able to plant around that. And especially with something like a structure or standing corn rows, you know, it really doesn't take up a lot of space. And these images really do a great job showing that. Next slide. Brian Ferdine is another individual out in District 7 doing standing corn rows. Just one more example. Let's go another slide, Dean. And Jim Nichols, we'll give this one a shot too. This is a really interesting series of shots of this living snow fence. So again, you know, our focus today is on those standing corn rows just because they're a great gateway into this program. But we've made sure we've provided information on a whole bunch of different practices that folks are using. The next slide, Dean. And yep, another great shot of some standing corn rows. You can see this one's a little wider. Let's go to the next slide. And that's what I've got for farm maps. So just a really useful tool that can be used in basically any of these conversations you might be having with folks that are interested. If you have any questions about those case studies or those farm maps at the moment, just put that in the chat. All right. And with that, I would like to introduce Dan Gullickson, who will be talking a little more about standing corn rows.
Well, thank you very much, Aidan. And thank you for the effort you put forth in this research project with interviewing all those 30 landowners out there. Excellent job in helping us continue to improve our program. Next slide, Dean. So as Aidan alluded to, you know, we have got a multiple of tools that we use for blowing snow control. Today's emphasis will be a little bit more on the standing corn rows and bales. Next slide. So with the standing corn row practice, you know, standing corn rows, if we look at a 33-foot wide width of standing corn rows, a 1/4 mile in length, it adds up to being about 1 acre of land that's being set aside for blowing snow control. And in the past, we used to talk about leaving 6 to 8 rows of standing corn rows. And, you know, that's when farmers were planting corn on 30-inch on center row spacing. And so it ended up being a wider strip of corn that was collecting the snow. But because farmers are going with narrower row spacing, instead of talking about the number of rows of corn being purchased, we should really be talking more about the footprint or the width. And so looking at a 30-foot wide width is really a good place to start. Next slide. You know, with our standing corn row program, probably the first time we started using it was back in the 1980s. And more recently, kind of tracking the program costs and looking at the production costs for the farmer. You know, the farmer, they bear all the costs of the land, the seed, the chemical, the equipment. You know, it's their corn. We're interested in the stocks at the end of the day to hold and catch that snow. Well, back in 2012, 2013, statewide within MnDOT, we only had 4 miles of standing corn rows, and that was all of our MnDOT districts combined. Our average price at that time was about $700 per acre. In 2014, 2015, we were bumped the price up to about $1,000 an acre, and we grew the program. But after being involved with some more research with the University of Minnesota and Dean Curran's group, looking at the farmers' production costs, we developed a benefit cost tool. And one of the things that we found is that we probably needed to get up to about $1,500 an acre to really get people interested in the program. Because as we look at the cost of production to grow 200 bushel acre corn, and this is based from Iowa State, the farmers had about a $770 cost. That'd be today's dollars in 2021 of just growing that corn. And so we really need to be looking at paying above that in order to provide the incentive to join the program. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Whoop, go back. So as we look at the standing corn rows, this here is a drone video that was taken along Highway 14 in the New Ulm, Cortland area. You know, we're looking at the farmer to get the combine back out in the spring to mobilize and maybe pick corn that could be salvaged. You know, average is about a 45% yield loss. Some years they might be able to harvest as much as 80% of the corn, and some years there'll be nothing out there. So we look at and assume that there'll probably be about half their yield loss will be gone on average. And also looking at the fact that they have to remobilize that equipment out there. So you take that $770 per acre production cost, add the $240 an acre for the inconvenience, you're now getting into that $1,000 point in terms of like a break even. And so as we look at our standing corn row program, each MnDOT district, because it's their money in terms that's going into this program, sets the budget or the price per acre for standing corn rows. So it's very important to reach out to each of your district snow fence coordinators to find out what your per acre rate is that you're going to be offering farmers. But MnDOT's average ranges anywhere from $1,000 an acre up to $2,000 per acre is what I'm seeing across the board with the various districts that I work with. Next slide. As we mentioned, standing corn rows can be the gateway to structural or living snow fencing. A prime example of that here being on the I-94 corridor near Moorhead. We had the farmers leave standing corn rows and they were able to see the effectiveness. We really saw the effectiveness and State Patrol commented on that they weren't out there nearly as often for crash reports. And so because of the demonstrated effectiveness, it was the gateway to go in with a structural snow fence the following year. And that gives us the benefit of year-to-year blowing snow control protection. Whereas the corn, with the corn-soybean rotation, we may be without protection one of those years when soybeans are being grown. Next slide. And the picture here just illustrating the structural snow fence at work, helping to keep I-94 open. Next slide. So as we're looking at reaching out to landowners about standing corn rows, blowing snow control, really focusing on the corridor approach, I think is exciting and is going to give us the bigger return in terms of improved safety and mobility and reducing our chlorides, our salt use, because we're focusing on a corridor. And as we see here on the 169 corridor, we have strips of corn up and down that corridor, helping to protect that area from the windswept snow. Next slide. So as we're looking at engaging and working with landowners about standing corn rows in areas that we have wide open country with fetch distance where that wind is blowing, that's about a mile or more. This diagram here would be a good starting point in terms of negotiating and talking to a landowner and to help them visualize what that would look like. You know, a minimum of a 30-foot wide strip of standing corn rows, and it could be left as one block. Or maybe they would like to spread that corn out a little bit and have two 15-foot wide strips of corn, and that would trip the snow twice before it gets to the road. Either one of those combinations work real well for us. Next slide. And as we saw the drone video earlier here, and I want to put a big shout out and thank you to MnDOT's aeronautics and the use of the drone. They collected this imagery here for us over this past year, and it's a very powerful tool in terms of helping visualize what we see out there. But looking at when you're working with landowners, farmers, look at 30 to 60 foot wide blocks of standing corn rows. Getting that width is key to having the standability and the snow storage over an average winter. Next slide. And some imagery here of seeing those two strips of corn at work. They could be 15 feet to 30 foot wide, each one of those strips of corn that are left standing, and leaving that gap between those in the middle there, that could be 75 to 100 feet. You can increase your snow storage. You can kind of distribute that snowdrift a little more uniformly in the farm field so that soil moisture is more evenly distributed as that snow melts over the winter and in spring. Next slide. And oftentimes one of the biggest challenges working with farmers is how are their fields planted, and are their rows oriented so that they're parallel to the highway. And when they're parallel to the highway, it's really easy to leave the standing corn rows, and we can see the near rows of corn nearest to the highway. Those are in the headlands and they're planted parallel to the road. But then to create that trip point, to get that multiple trip points there, the farmer actually combined against the grain. And it can be done. They have to go a lot slower, but it just shows that it can be done if the farmer is interested in doing it. Even though the rows aren't planted parallel to the road, there is the possibility that if they're willing to combine and take the time, they can harvest against the grain. Next slide. And the secondary benefits, as we look at finding multiple benefits, value added, the other thing is just keeping topsoil in the farm field and reducing that sediment getting into our road ditches that can impede our drainage and impact our roads. So these here have multiple benefits in terms of blowing snow control and topsoil wind erosion. Next slide. So as we're looking at driving the countryside and looking at possible sites for standing corn rows, we really want to be focusing on getting corn that's a minimum height of 4 feet, which we see right here. This past summer, we've had drought, we've had wind, we've had a lot of factors that may impact the standability of corn. And for us to have a good chance of that stuff standing throughout the winter months, we really need to be looking at it being about 4 feet in height to consider purchasing it. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Gary Wyatt to just talk a little bit from an agronomic standpoint, what to look for in terms of corn standability. Gary.
Thank you, Dan. Our University of Minnesota Extension agronomists are seeing drought problems with standing corn due to our drought this last year throughout the state. So you may want to look at the opportunity, obviously, of minimum 4 feet. We're seeing stalks that are lodging. That means they're breaking down this fall before harvest. We're recommending farmers actually do the push test and the pinch test. So I think this is demonstrated in a video that we'll see in just a minute. But you can basically push a stalk about shoulder high, push it over to the next row, and if it crimps or comes back to the normal position, then it's okay. If it crimps and stays in that position, crimps at a node or below a node further down the stalk near the base of the stalk, then it's got a stalk rot problem. We're seeing a lot of diseases in the stalk that cause lodging. So stalk rots are very prevalent this time of year with our drought conditions that we've experienced this summer. Certainly looking at the recommendation that Dan mentioned, the 44-foot tall corn is recommended. You may want to go out, if it's only 4 foot, you may want to go with that 30 to 60 feet out, or use the strip method and catch method, and then leave a gap and then have the 2 strips represented in that field. So certainly look at your options. If it's a poor standable corn and it's a critical site for snow control, we definitely want to sign up that farmer if we can at all possible. But you may want to look at the longer distance of 60 feet rather than 30 feet, and it may be 2 catch rows instead of 1 solid row.
Hi guys, thanks for joining us for Field Checkup Friday. I'm technical agronomist Brandon Beck with Channel, and I'm here with...
I'm Jason Pitcher. I'm a seedsman from Southern Illinois. And what we're doing out here today is something we try to do a lot as seedsmen, and that's being our customers' fields, walking them. And what we're looking at specifically is any issues with standability from stalks of our plant. So we're trying to help them prioritize harvest either field by field or by product. And this particular year, the spring of 2019 was extremely wet. We had a lot of rainfall when the corn plants were small, where we get soil splashing up on that plant, and that can get disease in that plant early, but doesn't show up until now. There's really 2 methods that we use to check for these issues, and that's a pinch test and a push test that Brandon's gonna demonstrate to you.
All right guys, so with the push test, what we're gonna do it a few places out in the field, probably 10 to 12 plants in a row. You're gonna go above the ear. You want to push on that stalk till we get the tassel across the tassel of the next row. Do that for 10 or 12 plants in a row. And what we're looking for is for the stalks to stay intact and not break off, either between the nodes or at the node. That could be an indicator of anthracnose stalk rot, physoderma stalk breakage, maybe some crown rot. So that's something we're going to be keeping an eye on. The other method is the pinch test, which Jason's going to show you here with this stalk.
Yeah, and the pinch test is just what it sounds like. You want to find in between the nodes of the corn plant on the stalk, physically pinch between each one, and look for those areas in the stalk that are discolored. If you're seeing a lot of stalks like that, give them a pinch. You can tell this one has some issues to it, and that'll help prioritize harvest in your field. So again, my name's Jason Pitcher, and appreciate you guys joining us for Field Checkup Friday.
Thank you, Dean. But yeah, that's a great 1 minute video in terms of just showing what that push and pinch test looks like from the standability of corn. You know, the other thing, we talk about, as Gary mentioned, if the corn is only 4 foot tall, wider is better. And if the standability is questionable, wider is better, just so that we have more opportunities to catch those snow particles and those corn stalks kind of helping each other stay standing. But in the event that they do fill up, the good news is that if you have the support and the cooperation of the landowner, you could go back in there and windrow that snow, because then you have some snow to work with to create that windrow, to create that snow catch for the next wind event. Next slide. Stack bales. Stack bales might be a pretty precious commodity this coming year with the drought. But bales are an effective tool for catching that snow. They act like a solid wall. And as we look here, there's the upwind side of the bales, and it actually will fill up on the upwind side first, the drift will, and then it will start to go over the top of it. And so where we have areas with wide open, unsheltered fetch distances that are, approximating 2 miles of just open country for that wind to blow, you may need to be looking at going with those bales stacking them up on top of one another. So you end up with like an 8 foot wide fence out there, or 8 foot tall fence out there. That is really sometimes going to be needed because they will fill up quickly if you have this really wide open country. So be thinking about stacking up twice. As we look at the compensation for bales, the farmer has to mobilize the bales, get them out there, stack them up, take them back down. MnDOT is in the neighborhood of about $2 to $3 a lineal foot in terms of what we've been paying to have that blowing snow control when there's stacked bales out there. Next slide. And this is just another example here of where we incorporated bales with the structural snow fence, because we had to keep a 120 foot wide gap between the fence and the field edge for the headlands, and we would get this snow that would wrap around the fence. But by working with the farmer to leave those bales to catch that wraparound drift, it really has worked well in getting more of the total fix. Next slide. So as MnDOT maintenance personnel working across the state, your district snow fence coordinators are located right here. If you go to MnDOT A to Z under L for living snow fences, you will find our living snow fence website, and be sure to contact your district snow fence coordinators to find out what your district rental rates are going to be for whether it be stacked bales or for the standing corn rows, because each MnDOT district establishes their own rental rate. Next slide. The other thing I want to make you aware of is the forms or the contract that we sign with the farmers. They can be found under MnDOT A to Z, Living Snow Fences. Go to the Form and Agreements tab, and then you'll be looking at either using a standing corn row agreement or the temporary blowing snow control agreement form, which should be used for the bales or for if they're going to put up some temporary orange snow fence. And it can also be used for standing corn rows. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those forms. Next slide. So this is the standing corn row agreement form. If you click on it, you can download this on your, print it off on your computer. And oftentimes these are just handwritten in by the field staff from the truck station. And they, if you go to the next slide, they have the landowner sign it, and then the maintenance engineer has the delegated authority to sign these. And so it's important that, before we actually make payment, because we make our payments in April of each year, that you do verify that that corn was left standing throughout the winter before we issue the farmer a check. Next slide. And then as you're, negotiating and working with the farmer, as part of the agreement, have a kind of a sketched out, if it's going to be a block of standing corn rows out there that's 30 feet wide, or if it's going to be 2 strips of standing corn rows 15 feet wide, have an illustration that can be just hand drawn to kind of illustrate what is going to happen out there. And that'll be good for communicating with the landowner or farm operator so that they leave this standing for us during the harvest season. Next slide. With the temporary blowing snow control agreement form, it basically allows us the flexibility of doing it for standing corn rows, temporary fencing, or for bales. And we've actually had a few farmers out there that have done all three, with us. And so this agreement works really nice to have just one form for all 3 types instead of having 3 separate forms that the farmer has to sign for each practice they're leaving. So this is an option to use if you have bales or temporary or standing corn rows. Next slide. So one of the things that I did was I sent to each of the district snow fence coordinators a checklist. Pilots, doctors, they have checklists in terms of before they go out there and perform their operation or their flight. And here's a checklist for field staff to go out and just make sure you got your bases covered when you're out there talking to landowners. And I sent this checklist out to the district snow fence coordinators. So if it's something that you think you would like to use, reach out to your district snow fence coordinator and they'll get this to you. But I think one of the key things here is, as Aidan mentioned in his interview of the early snow fence adopters, landowners who are doing this for public safety, making improvements from the transportation aspect of things more than anything else. And they like to hear stories in terms of what you as a plow operator experience out there. What is the problem that we're trying to correct? Is it a lot of spin outs, vehicle off-road incidents, state patrol call outs there? Are you having to go out there and do a lot of extra equipment like dozers and blowers to keep that road open? And so it's important for you to be able to share your story to help them visualize the problem that we're trying to correct. And I think that can be very compelling because if they see that the problem and how they can potentially contribute to solving that problem, there's maybe going to be greater success in them wanting to sign up. Next slide. And so with that, we provided an overview of, what we've learned from these snow fence adopters from over the past, in many cases, 20 plus years that have been partnering with us. We got to hear from Jed talking about the importance of this from the operations division, TSMO's goals and objectives. And I provided you some guidance in terms of what to look for from a technical aspect in terms of getting the best success out there with Standing Corn Rows. So with that, are there any questions that we could potentially answer right now? And that can be just typed into the chat box. And I'll turn it over to you, Dean, to read any of those questions that might be out there.
Okay, so far we don't have any questions, Dan. So please do, if you have something you'd like to learn more about, let us know.
One thing, Dan, I'll allude to the pinch test. If you look at the lower part of the corn plant, there's nodes about every 6 inches. And you just put your thumb and forefinger in those areas between the nodes and press. And if you can press in, obviously it's a weaker stalk. If you can't, if it's a pretty strong stalk, you won't be able to press that in. So that's another type of test that you can test the stalk strength.
Yeah, and there was a question about Farm App's website, and Aidan put that in the chat box if you want to get that link. Yeah, anything else? Any other questions? Great. Well, I guess we can continue on then, Dan.
Okay, well, I don't have anything more to add at this point here. And so we could, if Jed is available, maybe he could wrap this up for us.
All right, Dan, thank you very much. Thanks, Aidan, Dean, Gary. Appreciate your help on this today. And most of all, folks, thank you for being here. As I mentioned before, it is critical that we talk about MnDOT personnel. It's actually MnDOT. You are the folks that are actually out there connecting with those that are trying to make that decision of whether they're going to be able to step out and help us with costs, help us with safety, help their neighbors. And so please, if you've got questions down the road, please reach out to Dan and take a look at the website that we've got set up. But again, I thank everybody for coming today and have an awesome day. Take care. Bye.